Like Pandora, unable to tame her curiosity when presented with a box tempting special gifts. Once you begin your deep descent into the concept of gynecocracy, you simply cannot stop the proverbial evil spirits from coming forward. And, as is the case with the mythos of Pandora, there is a deeply spiritual problem at play which could end our very own golden age of humankind. Looks can be deceiving. From an unsophisticated vantage point, it would appear that egalitarian strides made by gender revolutionaries of yore amounted to a net positive. After all, women currently outnumber men in higher education. The she-cession, which prestige media fear-mongered about once 2020 lockdowns took some women out of the workforce, has mostly been overcorrected. In fact, not only are women in the workforce topping pre-lockdown levels, the female labor force participation rate is projected to rise 6% for ages 25 through 54, and 13.2% for ages 55 and older. None of these patterns alone prove that we live in a gynecocracy, but when many factors coalesce, the normalization and standardization of contraceptives, the rise in diversity and inclusion mandates within academia or the workplace, the entertainment industry's proclivity towards self-censorship, the acceptance or ambivalence toward abortion, the denial of biological truths in favor of sensitivity, the increasing hostility toward Judeo-Christian tradition, and the vilification of Homo sapiens' biological needs once understood by ancestral knowledge. Well, yes, we have indeed cooped ourselves up within a henhouse. A little while back, I mused on the viral concept of the longhouse, explaining through many eggy examples how the notion of a gynecocracy is accurately likened to that of a henhouse. This shelter is predominantly occupied by females, or hens, and often if a male, the cock, finds himself within the henhouse, he must either self-flagellate, becoming his weakest self, or he falls victim to a trap of shallow machismo. With a gynocentric culture, the latter is rarely tolerated. Instead, it would appear that men opt to shed their innate masculinity, and both men and women alike disregard the natural biological dispositions. Observing the over-feminization of the West from the perspective of a female often leads to feelings of unease. The mighty foundations of modern society have been systemically, covertly, and in some cases, overtly undermined. No, I don't harbor any guilt about being a woman in the workforce, and frankly, I'm blessed to be working in the women-centric roles that I do. But I do harbor deep sympathies for ladies young and old who have been led down a potentially unfulfilling path as a result of Marxist psychological warfare. I will be abundantly clear. Throughout all of human history, women have worked in some way, shape, or form. In big game hunting societies, it was within the group's best interest for women to craft clothing, weaponry, and equipment for the male hunters. In some cases, women actually joined the hunt alongside the men. But anthropologists who have studied modern hunter-gatherer societies report that it just made sense for women to be excluded from hunting, or at least opt out when necessary to fulfill child-rearing roles. That's not to say that these Upper Paleolithic women's roles were undervalued, nor were they dismissed from the hunt entirely. They knew how to follow tracks. They could forage, they processed and sewed hides, and in the hunt they likely tracked and flushed out animals rather than being the ones to kill larger beasts. But women had a more logical sense of priority. In the Middle Ages, European women worked many jobs critical to the growing medieval society. They baked bread, milked cows, brewed beer, washed clothes, spun wool and other fabrics, made parchment, served as healers or midwives, were shopkeepers, and in some cases were even employed as ironmongers or blacksmiths, among other stereotypically masculine roles. But again, women had a more logical sense of priority. Around the First and Second World Wars, women in post-industrial societies took the reins on many jobs that men once filled. After all, someone needed to fight on the front lines, and someone needed to keep the army well stocked with supplies and moral support to know that there was hope upon their return home. Elite ladies weaponized their social connections as operatives and spies, or lent their intelligence toward cryptology. Once the dust settled and a strong post-war economy emerged, America's birth spikes created the baby boomer generation. Today, women's priorities are out of kilter, but that doesn't mean that females should be segregated to the household, barred from the workplace, and pigeonholed into adopting a comically performative tradwife persona. We clearly contribute much more to society than just the children carried in our wombs, but we hold the power to determine whether or not our species will pass into oblivion. We must reevaluate our priorities and not just live on whims and feelings. We must be more pragmatic and logical. Feminist critiques of gender roles brought us to this bizarre juncture in history where many anti-natalists revere the notion of population collapse. Thank goodness the human species won't be contributing to further environmental damage or be born into an immoral, crony capitalist economy, right? America isn't alone in this masochistic mindset, despite our uber-progressive voices being amongst the loudest in the world. Our birth rate is under repopulation levels, meaning that adults aren't having enough kids to replace our existing population. This year, India, the superpower by 2020 or 2030, will likely fall below repopulation rate, and South Korea is looking at a 93% population collapse. And overall, more than half the humans worldwide are living in a nation that falls below its repopulation rate. But just push your baby making further and further off in the future when you've established your career, bought a house, and traveled all 7 continents, instructs the hen house. Some who speak these sentiments are genuinely mean-spirited, like the anti-natalists who can't conceptualize why someone would want to start a family when the future just seems so tragically bleak to them. But others are simply oblivious to the societal repercussions associated with redefining priorities for the human species. Indeed, egg freezing technologies, which, by the way, weren't developed to be our standard operating procedure, rather a Hail Mary pass for couples in need, provide a false sense of security. And fertility clinics over-report their in vitro fertilization success rates. While it is possible and an absolute blessing for some couples to use fertility technology, absolute shame that things like the sexual revolution and the introduction of hormonal birth control, for example, have likely stunted our reproductive capacities. I often wonder if we would need these groundbreaking pills, procedures, and potions if we had actually just left Mother Nature alone. You can't simply turn your fertility on and off like a light switch on the wall. As hormonal birth control now functions like a rite of passage into teen life, we're setting up literal children to suppress their natural cycles. Anecdotally, I fell into the trap, and many of my female peers did as well. The scientific literature generally makes the claims that contraceptives don't cause infertility outright, but the persistent suppression of ovulation absolutely can make things more complicated when a woman is finally ready to conceive a child. I could rant ad nauseum about the multifaceted, underreported issues associated with hormonal contraceptive use, but that's just the problem, isn't it? Adverse events toward medications or immunizations are so severely underreported. For instance, less than 1% of all adverse events for vaccines and less than 0.3% of all adverse events to drugs are filed and reported to the FDA. Hormonal contraceptives are a lifestyle drug. They allow for safer sexual liberation and empower women to behave like men. However, it's a double-edged sword because constant use renders women dependent on big pharma due to their laundry list of side effects. Hormonal contraceptives can, but don't always, affect our pheromones, can cause chemical castration, lead to immune system imbalances, destroy our libido, worsen our rates of anxiety and depression, act as a band-aid solution to mask serious health conditions, and in general lead us further astray from cycling through our natural state as female human beings. Our descent into spiritual decay may be to blame for these increasingly vocal denials of biological truths. The institution of marriage was once revered as a powerful social tradition, and a service-oriented one at that. In holy matrimony, you create your family's own personal haven in an otherwise heartless world, and together, you and your spouse raise one another up to fill the spaces left by each other's shortcomings. Man against woman, or woman against man, in broad, misandrist, and misogynist spiritual warfare, misconstrues the function of human connection. If we no longer respect the other sex for their unique characteristics as gifts from God, such as how women are well suited to be the ezer, or strong helper, to their man and bring him to his highest glory as a complement where he may be lacking, we're only adding fuel to the fires of not only toxic masculinity, but toxic femininity as well. Both sides of the aisle could benefit from true humility before God. All of these issues and so many more which plague us today lack a clear-cut solution. Anyone who promises you otherwise might just be an opportunist looking to cash in on the next trend. Or they may just be ignorant to the sophistry they've spread as the gospel truth. Having said that, it would be remiss to ignore the fact that, despite correlation not leading to causation, emasculation and gynocentrism play an integral role in everything I've been talking about. I've said it once before, and I'll say it again. America has an egg problem. The proverbial henhouse we've cooped ourselves up in elevates women above men at their own behest and represses the positive elements of masculinity.